Because a common question that I get asked a lot as a geriatric specialist is people have the idea that when they reach a certain age, then it automatically means they have to move into a care facility. But that's not the case. What I tell people is age is a number, and life is more than a number.
Welcome back to another episode of the Succeed Against the Odds podcast. Today, as my guest, I have the honor of having here with me Dr. Roger Wong. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, Roger, for my sake and everybody else's sake, can you please share with us what it is that you do? And before you do that, actually, I'm going to backtrack here just a second. I had the privilege to hear you speak at the TEDxStanleyPark.
Yes.
Event about a month ago, and your story was so compelling. And now I'm going to bring back to you, if you share who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, and it's my real pleasure to be here. So I am a geriatrics doctor. I am a specialist doctor who looks after seniors. I'm also a professor of geriatric medicine in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia at UBC. And I am an executive associate dean, which means my job is to train up future doctors and health practitioners for the province of British Columbia.
Wow, that's quite the responsibility.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So, Roger, what prompted you to speak at TEDx? What was the reason? What got you to do that?
Right. I have always have a passion to really spread the message on how can we take better care of our seniors. And in fact, I, as a geriatrics doctor, have worked over the years doing a lot of advocacy work in order to improve the well-being of seniors. But it occurs to me that there is still an opportunity to really get the message out to a broader audience. And that is why when I looked at the TEDxStanleyPark platform, it is something that is a good fit, is a good partnership. And I do know that there is clearly an interest and an appetite for not just information, but for all of us to learn through personal stories and how can we be successful against the odds. And in fact, this is a good example whereby when we're looking after whether it is someone close to us or ourselves as we age, there are many odds that we have to beat against, and which is why I thought, okay, this is a good opportunity. Let's do it.
That's awesome. Now, you shared a very, very sad story, and my heart was like so touched by the story because I could totally empathize, and like as you were telling the story, I was there with you.
Right.
Like I could just totally feel what you were feeling. Well, maybe not quite exactly as you were feeling it, but it was very, very moving. And would you mind sharing a little bit about that with our audience, or is that you want to keep it?
No, that's okay. That's okay. So it was a very personal experience. Very emotional, and it is a story about my loved one, about my grandma, and to share it on a big stage like at TEDxStanleyPark is a big deal for me. It's a really big deal. On one hand, I feel it is important for me to share that very real story affecting real people with real emotions. Because this is a good illustration of the message that I'm trying to get across. At the same time, I recognize because it is so personal that I really have, it takes a lot of courage for me to be able to say it out in a public forum and on a big stage. So I encourage for those of our audience who haven't had a chance to look at my TEDx Talk video, feel free to check it out.
Oh, we'll have the link to the talk. We'll have it. They're in the show notes. Just check the show notes. They're there.
Right. Because I have a lot of people coming to me, both women and men, afterwards, and they say, Roger, you're not supposed to make me cry, but I cry during your talk, and I'm right there experiencing the same emotions with you. And I guess what it shows really is by sharing my own story um, of my grandma, it helps us to think about our own loved ones. It could be a parent, it could be a grandma, it could be a friend, it could be a neighbor, it could be anybody, because all of us are aging, and aging is something that touches each and every one of us. And this is around the world, not just in Canada, but it's truly around the world, which is why I thought, to pay tributes to Grandma, I want to share the story.
That's beautiful. So, what would you say in your experience? Because your experience is as a grandson, as a
Mhm.
um, you'll have to watch the talk to see the actual full story of Roger and his grandmother. Um, but you're also a geriatric doctor.
That's right.
So you experience working with people, aging people, all the time. So based on your experience, your personal experience, and your professional experience, because it's a double, it's
That's
from
right.
two sides.
That's right.
What tips or advice, or what is it that you're seeing, and what do you see happening right now here in North America, um, outside of North America and Asia and other countries, and what can we do to make it better
Right.
from what it is now?
Right. We began the podcast today talking about beating the odds. And I think if you look at the odds, the numbers, as all of us age, there is a piece of a statistic, a number that says by the age of 85, 1 in 3 seniors will be living in a care facility. And that's a huge number. That's a huge number. The tough problem that all of us face is that seniors around the world, and certainly in Canada, are moving into care facilities too soon. And the result is that it means a loss of a number of different things: losing autonomy, losing relationship, losing the fun of living in a community, in your own home. So what I'm trying to do in my TEDx talk is really to talk about what can we do to keep seniors safe and in their home for longer. And as it turns out, like if I were to summarize, I mean, I encourage the audience to check out the talk, but if I were to summarize at a high level, it comes down to really two kinds of things. It comes down to compassion, which is really important, and it also comes down to technology. So we can use modern technology to help augment the compassion that we have within us.
In what way technology?
Mm-hmm.
You got me intrigued.
That's right. So I'm going to use one example, but again, there are other examples that I talk about in the TEDx talk, so check it out. One example is if you look at mobile technology. So smartphones, for instance. Smartphones these days are more than a telephone. It actually can do a lot of different things. There are different apps on it, and there is a GPS function so that we can track the location of where people are. And again, what I explained in the talk is using these kind of smartphone technology, sometimes it can help to ensure safety of our seniors. For instance, those who tend to wander off and maybe they're at a risk of elopement, like running away.
Mhm.
For instance, if they have memory difficulty, if they have Alzheimer's disease. But you can use GPS function to track where they are, and in a reasonably non-disruptive way, and that way to ensuring that people are safe, and that way to ensuring that for individuals with early or mild dementia like Alzheimer's disease, they can still live in their own home and live in a community.
What are your thoughts? That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
That is there's something I hadn't even thought about, like using technology in
Right,
that way.
right.
But I guess also maybe even surveillance cameras, or would that kind of infringe on privacy?
Yeah, so I've worked with thousands of patients over the years, and these are seniors. And oftentimes when I work with a senior, it's never a single person, it's always a community, their family, their loved ones. So many of the families have told me that they have set up some kind of a not so much a surveillance system, but they have closed circuit TVs and cameras in different places within the house, so that they kind of have an idea about the safety aspect of the person. Now, as long as you fully disclose to the person that, you know what, we have little cameras here and there, and again, our sole purpose is to make sure that you're safe, and if you explain that and with consent, with agreement from the person, that's all okay. But I think what we're trying to say now is there are new ways of looking at solving really tough problems, such as the one that we've been talking about, which is about safety.
Mhm.
And because a lot of times a motivation for seniors to move out of their homes into a care facility has to do with safety. I recognize that there will come a time when it will make sense to move into care facilities. So let's face it. But there is going to be a lot of opportunity before we make that move to really see how we can use our compassion and our technology available to us to make that difference.
Mhm. So basically, it's not a matter whether they should be in it, it's whether if the time is right.
Yeah, now a lot of times it is also about whether they should be. Because a common question that I get asked a lot as a geriatric specialist is people have the idea that when they reach a certain age, then it automatically means they have to move into a care facility. But that's not the case. What I tell people is age is a number, and life is more than a number. And that's really important for us to remember. Obviously, there are many seniors who continue to age very successfully, to live a healthy life. And even though they may reach the age of 85, 90, 95, that doesn't mean automatically they have to move into a care facility. I think what we talk about really is functionality. What can the person do, looking after herself or himself? And what are the kind of a safety net mechanism, a structure that we can put in place to supporting them to live longer at home?
You know, recently I had a guest in my show, and her business is one of the aspects of her business. It's not the only thing, but is to give companionship
Hmm.
to seniors. And I think based on what you're saying, there's probably going to be, because I don't think I'm not very familiar with the industry,
Right.
but my suspicion is, and correct me if I'm wrong because you would
Yes.
know more so, are there more senior centers than there are companionship services?
So it's very interesting that you raised that point, because for seniors who live alone in particular, we know that the fact that they're living alone, loneliness can actually have negative impact on
Mhm.
health, and that is one of the things that I cover in the TEDx talk, and I actually put it out on my Twitter feed a couple of days ago, because the statement that I talk about is, do you know that loneliness is the new smoking? Because what we know is there is a study that was published last year in 2017 in one of the American journals on psychology that talked about the negative impact of loneliness. In fact, not just on seniors, on anybody, but is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and it can shave off 8 years of life from an average life expectancy.
Wow,
That's huge. That's
that is
huge.
huge.
Because that question then is, what can we do to overcome that loneliness? Now, again, companionship is really important, and companionship clearly in real person is ideal. But a lot of times we know that families now live distances apart. It may be difficult, if not impossible, to have physically someone present. And this is where technology can also help to a certain extent. And one of the statements that I make during the TEDx talk is I talk about, yes, technology can help, but compassion is really more important even. And again, not trying to give everything away, check out my TED talk. But I think one example, for instance, is if you use computer tablet technologies. So let's take, for example, meal times. Mealtime is, in many traditional family setting, is a time for socialization, not just a means of sustenance. And um, sometimes families may live countries apart, but wouldn't it be nice if during meal times they can be beamed in on FaceTime or on a tablet? They can at least appear on the screen. Now, not the same when you have a real person there, ideally real person, but at least having family, loved ones,
The
etc.
next The next best thing to being in the same room
That's
is to
right.
be live.
That's right. And in fact, that is happening not just in seniors, because if you look at, there are many people, including young adults, teenagers. In fact, what they do is when they go out and hang out with their friends, and they may going out for dinner and a party, and there are folks who cannot join. And well, guess what? They call in, they Skype in, they FaceTime in, and that's
They
happening.
make them part of it.
Exactly.
I've been to meetings like that where someone's been, and workshops where someone's been sick, so they've Skyped in and
That's right.
been in the workshop
That's
virtually
right.
like that.
So in a way, it's just thinking about that and how do you extend that. Now, obviously, emphasizing real person and real
Yes,
touch
it's not the same.
is
It's not
always
the
preferred.
same.
Always preferred. So it is very, for me, it is very close and dear to my heart because of the story that I share, but also because of the work that I do. I see a lot of seniors and their families. Oftentimes, they struggle. They struggle to make that decision of whether they should move out of their home into a care facility. And sometimes it becomes, when should they be thinking about that? So in my TEDx talk, I also give some suggestions, some pearls in terms of what are some examples of, like, when is the right time to do the right thing kind of analysis.
Okay, so in your experience as a doctor in this field, do you find that it is usually the senior person that decides to go in the care facility, or is it the family that just makes that decision? Who makes that decision most of the time?
Right. Ideally, it should be a conjoint decision.
Ideally, but what is the actual case?
The real scoop. The real scoop. The real experience. So in a real experience, a lot of times it is the family members, the care providers. So we recognize that the stress of providing care can be tremendous. And many of the family members are what we call in the sandwich generation. So they have parents who are seniors, they got their own younger children, and they're squeezed right in the middle. And it's tremendously stressful. Sometimes, however, the seniors in the household may say, look, we actually would love the company of other seniors, and what are some of the options? So, and there's a very good example whereby we talk about there are different ways to get socialized. And it doesn't necessarily mean moving out of your own and then into a care facility in order to get the social environment. But sometimes that is something that has come up now. Oftentimes, for seniors who have memory difficulty, and we spoke about Alzheimer's disease or dementia, they may not exactly have that understanding to analyze the situation because insights can be affected. And those are really tough because inevitably we must remember that for seniors, as they move out of their home into a care facility, it represents not only a life important decision, but a significant loss. To them, it is a loss. Many times seniors, they have been staying in the same environment for a long time. So moving out doesn't just mean moving out. It means losing all the connections, the memories, the good times that happen. So we must be aware of that.
Yeah, I would imagine it's somewhat traumatic, even though it may not be at a high level. But like you say, it is a loss. So there's a grieving.
Absolutely. It's a lot of times it takes time. And in fact, that's what we see a lot. For those seniors who actually do need to move into a care facility for really strong reasons, typically because of health reasons and extreme stress in the household, the family, the care providing, and so on. We recognize that it takes quite a while for people to get used to the new environment. And therefore, one of the suggestions that I always share with patients and families is that try to minimize the number of moves. So in other words, it is not really recommended to jump from place to place to place to place. So if you do need to make a move, try to find a place that will satisfy the care needs once and for all. And the whole concept, what we're talking about, is trying to support our loved ones to age in the same environment. This is the whole concept of aging in place. ideally, the place that we're talking about is at home. But then if people do need to move into a care facility, then at least the care facility can have services and support structure available that will satisfy a wide range of care needs. As the care needs change over time, then the person doesn't need to keep moving.
Right. So, what would you suggest? Let's just say a senior has stayed home as long as possible, and now it is that time where it's just the logical next step for
Right.
everyone's sake, especially for the senior, to be under 24-hour assistance
Right.
in a facility. How would you, what tips can you give the family members to help that senior who's now in a facility not feel, because they're going through that grieving process,
Yes.
right? And even though you may go visit and do that, what can you suggest family members and friends can do to make besides not moving so much?
Right.
What can they do to do or say to help them still feel very connected and not like they've been discarded? Because in a way,
That's right.
I think that's a major thing. I think a lot
It
of the
is.
seniors
It
feel like
is.
they've been discarded once
Absolutely.
they go.
Yeah. I have a few tips that I can share with the audience.
Please,
And
yes.
these are things that we didn't have time to cover in the TEDx talk. So these will be new information, new
Perfect.
material.
This is for you.
This is for you. So the first tip that I would suggest is really have an understanding that we are trying to do, everything that we're trying to do is in the best interest of the senior person, of our parents or grandparents or our loved ones. That's really important. In other words, we have to not only understand the dynamics that we spoke about, the feeling of a loss in terms of a senior, the feeling of guilt in our own heart, because that's what we're talking about. So we need to recognize that. But remember, then we need to pretty much tell ourselves, okay, we are doing this in the best interest for our loved ones, for the senior in our family. This is a sustainable solution. So in other words, the concept of time can help. So recognizing that and knowing we're doing this just like we always do in the best interest of the senior person is a very important thing. So this self-revelation, this understanding is really important. It's easier said than done because a lot of times, this is the time in my experience working with thousands of patients and families over the years, is that people who have history, baggage, dynamics in the past as they were growing up as kids or grandkids, this is a time that all those emotions start to emerge. And we have to try to rationalize and say, okay, we recognize that we have that story, that baggage in the past, but now, this is now, so we need to focus on that. So that's the first tip, is really to have that good understanding. The second tip that I have really is try to have a plan. A plan is better than a reaction. Now, what does that mean? So, for instance, we use the example of individuals who may have long-standing health conditions. Dementia is an example, but there may be other people who have devastating stroke, for instance, or very severe Parkinson's disease, what we call degenerative diseases of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
We know that current management and treatment, even though they're very helpful, but they are not curative. In other words, people cannot be cured. So therefore, having some planning in terms of, okay, at what point do we as a family need to think about seeking alternate care and have that conversation with the senior if possible, and definitely within the family and the household early on, as opposed to waiting till the 11th hour, such as, oh, someone has fallen and broken a hip and now in the hospital and now could not leave the hospital and could not just go back home. Now, what do we do? Now, that does happen because there are unexpected accidents.
Right.
But if you can have a plan as opposed to reacting in the same timing of a crisis, it helps. So that planning becomes really important.
It becomes preventative.
Exactly. And in a way, I know that many of the audience are entrepreneurs and in business. It's not dissimilar to what we do with everything at work. Now, the difficulty here, the special piece here, is that there is typically a lot of emotion involved in these kind of planning. It's not just a business decision. It's much more bigger than a business solution. So, but I think that taking that proactive approach of planning so that it becomes preventative. So that's the second tip. And the third and final thing that I share a lot with families and friends, and this is really important because it is for the family, this piece, is what I say to them is, look, if or when the senior person does need to move into a care facility for really strong reasons, for really good reasons, please understand it doesn't mean that you are abandoning them. It doesn't mean that you're giving up. Far from it, it means redirecting energy to doing things that are of a higher quality of life. For instance, spending time going over the old photo album, having a conversation, sipping a cup of tea, as opposed to doing what I describe as nursing care and trying to worry about did they lose their bowel? Did they have a fall? Have they taken their pills yet? Have they wandered off somewhere else? So changing the focus, redirecting the energy into doing activities that have a better quality of life for both the senior person and the loved ones, the family. Those are the 3 tips.
Wow, that third one really hits home. It really hits home. I know my grandma she's passed away now, and I'm from Italy, and my whole family's back there. And when she passed away, she was there, but she was sick for a very long time. And I remember the family. They were very adamant. There was no way they would put her in a care facility. They really wanted her to stay home. It was very challenging, though.
Right. I totally understand because, again, in my experience as a geriatrics doctor, I have met with many families from different cultural backgrounds and values and belief systems that there are very strong feelings about maintaining and keeping family members at home, which, again, under usual circumstances, makes complete sense. Yeah. And that is the premise of my TEDx talk. And how do we support that? But there comes a time when things get really tough, and usually it is influenced by medical or health reasons. There's usually some kind of an overtone. It's not just because, well, it's over passage of time and all of a sudden something magical happens. It doesn't work that way. It's typically because of some kind of a health reason, a medical event, and maybe a hospital stay, and what happened afterwards, and function starts to decline. The concept of function and frailty comes into those kind of consideration, and that can get really tough. That was the real reason why I want to get the message out on a TEDx stage, to try to empower our seniors and their families and their loved ones. How do you solve this really tough problem? And so I actually have been working very diligently over many months trying to put that talk together, because there is a lot of good evidence, a lot of good nuggets of information in the medical literature. But how can I get the message across in a way that people can understand in an easily actionable way? And also, it so happens that I have kind of that personal experience, so I get it.
So the heart is with it. It's not just
exactly
the talk, and it totally comes through the TEDx talk. Well, Roger, I have to thank you for bringing this subject to light, because I think it's something that it is really not talked about. Like, we know it's there, but I don't hear people talk about it. But I do know a lot of people with aging parents. And I've heard people talk about, seniors care centers and putting their parents there. And I'm like, that's not where I'm at this stage of my life. But it is something that is happening. Right. So I'm very grateful that you've decided to, unfortunately, because I don't know if it was what happened to your grandmother that prompted the whole thing. Is that what prompted the?
Well, I have to say for grandma, because and I have to be careful because I get very emotional every time I talk about grandma, because she and I were very close together. in particular as I was growing up. And then, as I talked about in the TEDx talk, I pretty much was established in my career when it happened to my grandma. And that's the irony of life, that as a geriatrics doctor, I have all the tools that I use to help my patients and their families, and yet my own family and my grandma, and which is why what I really try to get this message across, and thank you for inviting me to your show and your podcast, because it is a really important message for all of us to get out. And you're so right, it is difficult to get out. People talk about it over dinner conversations, over hallway conversations, but in any kind of press or media, very little is talked about it. It's so interesting because it clearly is affecting all of us, because I hear it all the time.
And one day we're going to be seniors.
That's right.
So it doesn't exclude anyone.
Exactly.
We're all in it. We're all in it.
And yet in kind of organized event and TED Talks and TEDx Talks, even not a lot of press, in which I thought, okay, I will put myself out there and try to promote the message, and hopefully the audience will all help to spreading that very important message through the TEDx video.
Well, I think the message will spread because it affects every single one of us. It's not, it may feel like maybe it does not. If, if some of you watching this are super young, may think, oh, it's a long time. Well, it can affect you because you just don't know, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I certainly have seen in many situations the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren are facing exactly the same tough issue, because then they get to provide the care they want for their grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather. I've seen those situations as well. So I think, you're absolutely right, Francesca. It affects all of us.
Yeah. Anyway, so thank you so much. If our audience wants to get in touch with you and find out more about what you're up to or more on this topic, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways. So I was first of all say, check out the TEDx video. In the description of the TEDx video, there is an email address that is on the YouTube channel on TEDx. So that's good. I'm also on Twitter, so you can find me. My Twitter handle is Roger Wong 10, and you'll find me. And I really have been encouraged because over the weekend I just discovered that the TEDx channel, the central channel, actually has picked up this talk, and they were promoting it.
I am not surprised. I am not surprised. So excellent.
So I'm really pleased to be up here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you.